Future of talk is here. Power 102 Digital.
This is Power 102 Digital Wednesday. Welcome to Hard Talk with our host, Fareed Ali. He has a special guest. I'll allow Fareed to introduce his guest. Good afternoon, Fareed.
Good afternoon, David. It's good to hear your voice, and it's good to be here again on another Wednesday afternoon to discuss, the live issues that confound us every day. How's everything going with you?
Well, I'm okay for now. I'm always rolling with the punches.
Well, we always have interesting weeks here.
Yes.
Dr. James, thank you so much for making yourself available. It's good to see you. It's a new year. The last time I saw you, it was an old year.
Well, it's good to see you too, Fareed. And David, how are you doing?
I'm okay, Dr. Vanas James. I'm okay.
To the listening public, I have today as my guest Dr. Vanus James, someone who I always refer to as the voice of Tobago. Dr. James, interesting things are happening in Tobago again, and we can't escape that. But it's good for democracy, and it's good for the editorial and the chit chat that we all have about things that happen in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to focus on Tobago today because we haven't spoken, you and I haven't spoken on this forum, on this platform for some time. And I tend to let time pass and let the issues float to the surface. So before we could carry a discussion. I was reviewing in preparation for this chat. What we're going to talk about in terms of the public listening, we're going to talk about Tobago, but we're going to raise the small issue of the oil spill on the backload of the wider issues of Tobago and its autonomy. All of this marriage of issues is an interesting cocktail, and it will never go away. This is something that we have to live in this Rhode Island state. Dr. James, when I look at, in preparation for this discussion, I was looking at the Trinidad Express, the 31st of December 2023. Just looking at how the national newspaper, the Express, summarized what's happening in Tobago for the past year. Some of the things that engaged our minds is the Fally Augustine audio gate situation where, there was in the public space the whole issue of a tape that carried a dialogue, and that dialogue spoke to the chief sec, allegedly carrying a conversation with someone, and that dialogue, it revealed that discussions were being had at a executive level to, it is alleged, undermine central government and some of the things that they were doing. That came and it rose to the surface and died a natural death. Let us put it that way. The police, it was alleged, were investigating the origins of the tape and things that were said, and whether any criminal charges ought to be brought, or whether a criminal investigation ought to be initiated in any way. That is now yesterday's news. When we look at the THA and its current incarnation, they have about a 2-year shelf value, if I might put it that way. And we know how things go in politics. They're going to be facing the polls. This administration will be facing the polls in 2 years' time in Tobago. So time passes like that. And the final year of your dispensation in office is always spent trying to gain another term, meaning we just have about a year left in Fally Augustine's THA. Let's jump to where I want to bring you in. You're the learned mind here. Our president in September of 2023 indicated that she's challenging Parliament to grant Tobago the autonomy that it deserves. What are your feelings in terms of autonomy for Tobago? What exactly is autonomy? And what do you think the president meant when she said granting Tobago autonomy?
Well, I can't read it. I am the last man to ask what the president has in mind, in her mind. I know you can't read the president's mind. She has to explain, and we'll all be able to judge from her explanation whether she understands anything at all about autonomy. If you want to know what I think, then I can tell you that. But there's a whole lot of, first of all, for me, it's not about feeling. It's the substance of what is required for the country to make progress. Not just Tobago to make progress, Trinidad and Tobago to make progress. All of the prescriptions for good governance in Tobago apply to Trinidad and Tobago. The country is not set up properly for its development. It's not set up properly for the citizens to own it. It's not set up properly for the communities to make progress and to help us grapple with things like crime and so on. And we need a whole reform of the structure of government, and that is really all the talk about autonomy should go to. Let me also make the point for the benefit of your audience that I think for the first time in my experience watching and listening to Dr. Rowley, he made the right call this time, deadly correct call, to let's sit down and work out how to set up the country properly. I hope that's what he means by constitution reform. But even if that's not what he means, we should force him to mean that. So the call to set up this process to give Terry Farrell and the other guys, the team, to put together a pathway and let's have a convention. That's the right call. And barring any quibbling about the time to get it done properly, the country needs to sit down. Tobago needs to work out its own contributions to that agenda, because we have a lot to teach the country about what is to be done there. And Trinidad needs to work out its own thinking, and we all get together in some kind of proper forum after you've held your forum down there and we have held our forum here, and we work out a joint position as two equal partners in the nation of Trinidad and Tobago as to how to set up the country properly so it could make progress finally, and so we could finally bring closure to the deadly damage that was done by slavery and strict indenture to our people. So I hope that's what the president has in mind, although I doubt it.
Fally Augustine went on record as soon as the president said what she said, and said that he welcomes autonomy for Tobago, and he welcomes any discussion that he and his the THA could have with the parliamentarians in order to achieve that. Do you have any idea what Fally meant by him welcoming autonomy for Tobago? Meaning,
Same as I can't read the president's mind, I can't read Fally's mind. He has to explain to the society what he thinks. And let me say, that's the same Fally who said, after he was challenged not to send down Hochoy Charles's notes to the parliament, he said it's not his job and it's not his place to lay out the constitutional arrangements that are required for the people of Tobago to make progress. So I don't know if those two things could fit into the same basket of proper understanding. If he knows what he's talking about, he lays it out to the country, as I would, and any serious scholar who understands the issues confronting Tobago and the country. Let me repeat, it's not just about Tobago. If he understood all of that, he would seize the opportunity to say, okay, this is where we have to go, and we're going to call Tobagonians together to work it out. The fact that he hasn't said that, and that he is saying that somebody else should work out what kind of autonomy Tobago should have, it's not his responsibility, as he is in the public place saying, tells you he doesn't understand really what the fundamental issues are. And I suspect that the president is in the same boat. I think the good thing about what Raul is doing is that he's saying, okay, I'm open to learning. After he had said in 2015, he doesn't want to change the rules. So now, at least under his leadership, he's saying, let's have a serious conversation. Let all the new learning come to the fore after all the decades of mishandling of this issue. And let's have a proper national conversation and get started at last on liberating our people and setting us on a path to development.
You mentioned that there should be contributions to this agenda for Tobago autonomy from both Trinidad and Tobago. What conversations have you all been having in Tobago concerning how autonomy should be approached?
Well, I am always in the media. If you ask me about what I am doing, I'm always in the media, on television, holding mini series on the issue of autonomy and proper constitutional reform for the country. And I am up and down now, beginning a process of going to the communities, which are not recognized in the Constitution at all, ever since Eric Williams mashed up the county council system. I am going to the communities to ask them what they want and what they think, because I don't think it is possible for anybody to seriously grapple with the fundamental deficiencies of the Constitution we have without knowing whether the communities up and down the country are willing to engage in the process of taking responsibility for their own destiny, for carving out a pathway to self-determination, and helping us in that process to grapple with problems like under-education of our workforce, crime, burgeoning crime, difficulties with our economic transformation program, and so on. If we don't get our communities into the process properly, and if they're not willing to come in properly, if they are, for example, under the captured by mental slavery to think that somebody else has to work it out and they don't have any responsibility for it, then we're in big trouble. So we might as well go and ask them. I mean, you got to ask Laventil people, do you understand the value of constitutional reform to you? What kind of arrangements do you want in the Constitution to ensure that you, as the people of Laventil, could shape your own destiny, carve out the proper future you want for something like, say, PAN or anything else you're doing, and ensure that the people of Laventil finally get a good shot at development? And the same for MOVA and all of these places, Palm East. You could look wherever you want, Pinal and so on. All over the country, we have a whole set of neglected communities because the Constitution provides no mechanisms through which they could pursue their own interests, represent their own interests in the political and parliamentary and governance process, and so on. And as long as we keep going that way, we will fail to make progress with our development. So I am happy that Rowley has moved in this direction and signaled that he is open to learning. And I'm up and down fighting to ensure that the public understands. Just this morning, I did a full lecture on this issue with a team here in Tobago. So what we're doing, we're engaging each other. Of course, we have a reluctant executive council, a reluctant THA that is not prepared, evidently, to take the lead in organizing Tobago properly, to conduct a conversation about what we ought to be doing and be prepared to share a Tobago position with the people of Trinidad and the central government down there. But if Fale doesn't do it, we will do it anyway.
Do you all have any open pathway to discussion with Fale Augustine to building consensus and to hearing what he has to say and coming up with a policy or coming up with some physical document that you could relate to in approaching central government or approaching Dr. Rowley and his cabinet, or approaching or having it presented in Parliament and so on?
Well, we'll try. I mean, all of us are here. We'll all the people I know who are involved with him and who he worked with, the guys who worked with him, with Hochoy and so on. I know all of them very well, very closely. And I am always signaling to them that this is the way we have to do it. We have to call a Tobago convention. Don't just leave this up to Rowley and his team in Trinidad. Let's do our own convention now that Rowley has opened the door. So I am putting that out into the public place every chance I get. It is up to Fale to wake up and smell the coffee. But if he doesn't, the rest of us are not just going to lie down and sleep, because this is a golden opportunity. So actively, we're working on this agenda. still, the proper answer to your question is like the proper answer to the question about what the president means and so on. You remember Farley shut off his phones. Nobody can. I mean, he engages those he wants. Typical authoritarian government. You talk to a few and you don't set up the government in a way that allows all of us to engage in the conversation. So I can't tell you whether Farley will open back his phones by setting up a proper process. I don't know. But my call is for that to happen. And the best leadership for that for Tobago should come through the THA, not Farley. You know. The Tobago House of Assembly ought to constitute a proper process through which Tobagonians of all ilks and Trinidadians and the whole diaspora should be able to use the agency of the THA to lay out what is appropriate for the construct of government that we need to drive development here and in Trinidad and Tobago. But who can read the minds of people who lock their phone off? You can't. I can't.
Dr. James, Farley Augustine is a single man. He's not the face
That's
of
what I'm saying.
He's not the face of and the voice of and the embodiment of the THA. If it is, he is.
Well, he's the chief secretary. He's the chief secretary. That's the point of being a chief secretary. You are the voice of the people of Tobago to Trinidad. You're the voice of the people speaking collectively for all of us here in Tobago and to the rest of the world. That's the meaning of being a chief secretary. It's not just a post with a big job and a house to live in. How you mean? He is supposed to be, and he is wrong to say it's not his place and his job or his responsibility. If Robbie said that, he wouldn't be sitting in the THA today. That is not the position that a chief secretary is supposed to adopt. Pocho Charles didn't have that position. You, as the leader, the people, and let me remind you and the rest of the public that when anything goes wrong in Tobago, it doesn't matter whether it's murders or oil spill or anything else, pothole in the road, the people of Tobago tend to look to the THA to deal with it. So we know the boundaries of the nation are not under the jurisdiction of the THA, but Tobagonians expect the THA to weigh in heavily and properly on this business of something like the oil spill. And the same is true for constitutional reform. If the THA doesn't want to take responsibility for the design of government that would work properly for the people of Tobago, then the rest of us are going to have to intervene and force their hands. We're not going to just sit back and do nothing and let the opportunity pass. Whether the THA as Farley or the executive council or whoever they are, whether they think that is not their job or not is not relevant to the people of Tobago in a certain sense, because if they don't want to do the job, we still have to get it done.
Surely you would accept that the way the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago is the way it provides, it makes central government king. The parliament right. The parliament has 41 seats that are up for grabs every 5 years. It's divided centrally between two competing elements. One doesn't have the special majority to pass laws into being without the help of the other. And Tobago survives under the THA Act by receiving subventions from central government. When I was looking at I looked at the Newsday, the 27th of June 2023. The rubric reflect that the THA requests $4.54 billion from central government. That narrative is an ever-changing, ever-lasting narrative. The THA depends on government subvention, central government subvention, to survive, to manage Tobago. When we look at the relationship between Keith Rowley and Farley Augustine, our Prime Minister indicated that he's not prepared to sit in a room with Farley Augustine unless there's a third party present, that he sees him as dangerous. I don't know what dangerous means. I'm reading from the editorial that everyone reads on a day-to-day basis on the newspaper. If it is the relationship I could only say that if a third person has to be present in the room when these two men meet, it means to say one of the two parties doesn't trust the other. And for all intents and purposes, if it is Keith Rowley Estate staying same, it means that he doesn't trust Valley. My view is until that relationship mends or until it's on its heel in some way or the lines of communication at its lowest point becomes fluid where they can have a discussion with each other, then how do we progress the autonomy discussions given that the chief sec and the prime minister isn't on speaking terms or they
But
have
we own the country for read. You own the country too. We are all, every one of us is a owner, just like Rowley and Farley and Kamala and so on. All of us own one share, each one equal share of the citizens of the country. And it is not the business of the people of Tobago to wait on Rowley and Farley to agree on the destiny we all should have. It's for all of us to wait. I don't wait on Rowley, I don't wait on Farley. I go to the public in Tobago here routinely and lay out all my science, all my economics, all my government and politics, and all my research results, and push the society to wake up and learn about what is best and how they should function as owners of the country. So that has nothing to do with a flawed law. The THA Act is a fundamentally flawed law. It is not a design with good governance. And this business of the meeting with Rowley and Farley was cooked up by Hochoy and Ramesh to grapple with the fundamental deficiencies of poor governance and authoritarian government that's built in to the design and the fabric of the THA Act. And let me remind you, it is not that the central government is designed as a king. The cabinet and the prime minister is a king, and the cabinet is an aiding and abetting operation of a kingdom. The parliament is designed with a king at the head of as the head of the executive, because there is no mechanism in the design of the parliament for people to go to the parliament as the vast majority vote and make law, binding law, to regulate the behavior of the cabinet and the behavior of Rowley. That's what makes him a king. He can make, barring when he needs Kamala's support to pass special majority laws, he can govern the country without any oversight and any second opinion of any kind. And if you look carefully in the THA Act, you see the same thing. It's exactly the same design. It's designed in the constitution, the original constitution of the country. It survived Hayatali, it survived Wooding. It's there now, it's in the THA Act, it's in the local government designs that we are operating in the country. So the whole constitution of the country is designed in a fundamentally flawed way. Local government, THA, central government. And it's not for Rowley and Farley to know that. It's for all of us as citizens to know that. That's what we were saying to the country as young people in 1970. Empower the people. That means starting from you, the citizen, through the communities, through local government, all the way up to the central government. We have to construct a design that gives every citizen and every community a proper chance to represent his, her, or its fundamental interests whenever decisions are being made that would affect you. So when all of that is bundled into a broad set of principles in the Constitution would not look anything like the bogus arrangement that was cooked up in Marlborough House by Eric Williams and Ellis Clark and Norman Manley out of Jamaica. The whole Caribbean is victim of this terrible design, monarchical design that they have constructed here. But it is us, the people, who are ultimately responsible to say, okay, time's up. We're prepared. We know better. We understand better science. We understand proper construct now. Let us get together. So I agree with Rowley on that. Let's get together and work it out properly. And it is not for Rowley and Farley to work that out. And if they don't get along, that's the business. We need the reform of government, so it doesn't matter whether they get along or not. The rest of us can drive the executive in Tobago to do the things we want done. That's what lawmaking really is all about. Lawmaking, as you would know from your professional standpoint, is a device to allow the representatives of the people, legitimately composed, to tell the executive what the rules are and to monitor and evaluate their implementation. And when they don't implement in a proper way, you change the rules to ensure you could ring fence whatever they're doing, whatever they're making as policy and implementation procedures. So it's your responsibility and mine. It's the media's responsibility and so on. All of us. We can't just point with finger at this stage. Once Rowley opened the door, we're not pointing with finger at him anymore. We're not pointing with finger at Farley anymore. We're taking over as a society and we're saying this is what we want to do.
Forgive me for saying this. You can correct me if you're of the view that I'm wrong, but this is just my expression, my interpretation. I find that the Prime Minister from time to time double talks. He said at one time he said he doesn't that Farley Augustine and this current constitution of the THA should return to the polls because he doesn't recognize them as the duly elected body, and therefore because of the fall off with the PDP and the fact that the people of Tobago elected the PDP into office, that Farley and they don't have a mandate to govern. Now, that is one expression that Keith Rowley put into the public space. We all recognize that the THA, and surely you would recognize saying that the THA is the body for self-expression of the people of Tobago. That is why it is we had an election and Tobagonians voted the PDP into power, and well, we all know the fall off, and now Farley is the chief sec. If it is Rowley, his position is one where he recognizes or he does not recognize this constitution of the THA as having the mandate to govern the affairs of Tobago, then that in itself triggers in our minds, the people of Tobago and Trinidad, that there's something wrong with Rowley's approach to the presently constituted THA, and that in itself, that his interpretation of the duly constituted THA in its current state will impact on how he relates to whatever they bring to the table. In other words, it forecloses on the conversation about autonomy. His attitude and his aptitude towards the THA needs to be addressed before we could progress the autonomy discussions. Are you seeing that as an issue, or you think that is a side issue? Or
I actually agree. I agree with you. It's a side issue. I don't think it's central at all. I think whether Rowley thinks that Farley should go back to the polls or not is not germane to the fundamental issues that the constitution design that we have, the whole constitutional design raises for Tobago or for Trinidad or for the country as a whole. Nothing that is fundamental is addressed by whether Farley goes to the poll or not. Just as I pointed out when we had the 6-6 tie, nothing fundamental was changed by adding 3 seats. Rowley simply didn't understand what the real issues are. And I hope now that his calling for a constitutional reform conversation will open him up, as it will open up everybody else, to proper learning about how this thing ought to be addressed. But if we had designed a proper THA, just as if we design a proper government in Trinidad, and the country make up its mind through whatever designs, whatever mechanisms, that Rowley has to go. There is no mechanism in the Constitution for us to remove Rowley from office. None whatsoever. The design is so terrible that we have to wait for 5 years to pass before we could make a final decision on whether to kick Rowley out of office or not. The same was true for Kamala. The same is true for Holness in Jamaica. And up and down the Caribbean, we have this bogus notion of democracy that is entrapping our people in underdevelopment. And we have to come to grips with what is bogus about it and how it ought to be fixed. That has nothing to do with whether Farley should be kicked out of office or not, that the people ought to be in a position to take that decision right up front. That's what you see in the British parliamentary design when the Prime Minister serves at the pleasure of the Parliament. The Americans are grappling with the limitations of their presidential design when they may want to remove somebody from office, but they can't because they either have to impeach him or wait for the next election. Well, we have that same fundamental challenge in the THA design. We have to wait until the next election, and it doesn't matter what Rowley wants. If he wants to deal with the fundamental design problem in the THA, let's do constitutional reform. So that I agree with is the right move that he is making. And let's understand what we're talking about here. We're not talking about changing the number of seats and all these kind of minor matters. We're changing the whole design to ensure that people and communities are fully and properly empowered to look after their own interests and have mechanisms up the chain from Mason Hall into the THA, from the THA into the central government, elected senatorial designs to deal with development, budgeting properly, and so on. All of those things have to be thrown into the pot, and they have little or nothing to do with the problem Farley has. Farley has a problem of illegitimacy and incompetence, both. And Rowley is right to point his finger to those. But he's overseeing a design that doesn't equip him with any tools, political or otherwise, to deal with the crisis that he thinks exists. I agree that Farley doesn't know what he's up to. I agree that there's a certain amount of illegitimacy, but it doesn't that illegitimacy doesn't have much to do with the fact that the PDP broke up. It has to do with the fact that the commitments we made to the people of Tobago to set up the THA so all of us could have a say. Using the current law, you could set it up. So all Tobagonians and Tobago communities could have a proper say in sound policy. That commitment was not kept, and up to now, from January of 2022 to now, Farley has done zero to deal with the autonomy thing that we had put to the people of Tobago during the elections of 2021. So after 2 years of doing nothing on autonomy, you really are saying, no, it's not your place, it's not your job, it's not your responsibility. Rowley has opened the door, and Farley is twiddling his thumbs about it. The rest of us have to move on. So this is not about Farley or Rowley or their misunderstandings or their lack of appetite for one another's presence and company and so on. It's for us, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to understand what the possibilities are that are opened up by Rowley's move, and to seize the option to make sure that this is not Papi Show that Rowley is going to practice here. The rest of us must now weigh in fully. It took us 51 days in 1970 to tell the country, time to empower the people. And the most fundamental changes the country has ever seen were achieved and created from that movement. 51 days. It doesn't need more than 3 or 4 solid months of serious work for the country to work out what is to be done here. So let's get to work. Me interested in looking at no one man and so on. Let's change the system so you and I could be truly and properly empowered, and our communities would no longer be left behind and oppressed by the structures that we have put in place called government in Trinidad and Tobago. That's as true for Siparia as it is true for Laventille or Charlottesville.
Dr. James, I'm on the same page with you. Allow me to ask this. Mm-hmm. Do you see the current leadership in Tobago as a hindrance to the progression of talks on autonomy?
Well, I think from listening to Farley and his statement that is not his job and his responsibility, the THA could be a hindrance, because the best way to proceed is for the THA to take the lead. Announce put together a proper team that could do the drafting, set up a convention, set up a process to find out what the communities want. Just the same thing I am doing now with my own resources. And let's get the people of Tobago to lay out whatever they know, whatever they think. I would show up, Farley would show up, he'd bring what he know, I would carry what I know. Winford James would show up, you would show up, and so on, and we all would say, this is what we understand, this is what we think, and we'll see how we could come to some common principles that would elevate the discussion and educate the country about what the possibilities are for good governance in Tobago and ultimately, therefore, for development. That's what has to be done, and the THA should lead it. But if they don't, we should not let them be a barrier. That's the reason I'm saying I am answering you carefully. They may function as though they don't want to do anything, but that's their business. That's 15, 18, 19 people. The rest of us have a country to build, an island to develop, and so on. And we should get about our business regardless of what the THA says or does. If they're on board with us, okay. If they're not on board, we go about our business and do our work and forget about them. That's what it means to own and run a country as a citizen.
But Dr. James, despite the leadership, in spite of the leadership, Tobago will progress. Tobago is larger than the personalities. Tobago outlives and has outlived and will continue to be long after the dispensation of Fally Augustine and this current executive. Let's talk about some of the developments in Tobago. The airport.
May I give you, before you run there, Farid, may I give you one little piece of historical information, just to warn you to be careful with that declaration. Sure. Since 1884, right? This is 140 years now. Tobago has been in the economic doldrums and made no progress because of fundamentally flawed qualities in the leadership. In James Begat, APT James, Robinson, Pamela Murray, Ho Choi, all bringing fundamentally flawed answers to the question of how we ought to organize Tobago and organize the relationship between Tobago and Trinidad and how we ought to organize the country. And so leadership in the sense of what they know and what they understand could be a genuine barrier. And I want to remind you and the country, the Americans today are able to look back after 250 years and say, our founding fathers, Jefferson, Madison, Washington, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and those people, Mason, got it right in their design of a type of government that doesn't deliver a king, but doesn't deliver a weak executive either. That was the way they framed the problem. They wrote down a constitution to solve that problem. We, looking back after 140 years, are still wringing our hands and holding our heads because of the incompetence of 6 decades of and more of 5 generations of incompetent leadership. So leadership could matter in the sense not of being authoritarian, but in the sense of being informed and skilled in grappling with the fundamental problems we have. And you are in Trinidad suffering the same fate because of the incompetence of Eric Williams in understanding what CLR James was saying, that every cook could govern, everybody could be brought properly into the governance process. And Williams called that commerce government, and we're paying the price for that to this day. So don't ignore those kinds of things when you're interpreting history. Leadership matters if it's rigged up around competent, high quality information. Other than that, you are right. The rest of us have to go on with our lives, regardless of the incompetence of our leaders.
But I think we both agree that the THA Act in itself stands in the way of leadership making decisions that may be making the best decisions, because we are victims of the provisions of the act that is fundamentally deficient in achieving the required objective.
Correct.
So some of the personalities who you would have mentioned within the context of the subsistence and existence of the THA Act, they would have been frustrated by what the Act provides. The Act is set up to keep Tobago constrained and to restrain from Tobago from expressing itself in a way that they determine their own future.
Quite correct. And the same is true for the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to the people of Trinidad. Trinidadians are not any more free from tyranny of the cabinet than Tobagonians are free from tyranny of the Executive Council. It's the same design, same structure.
When I travel in my little travel up the Caribbean, when I look at some of the airports I find myself in, Dominica, Grenada, some of the small islands, I'm in no way, be crying these islands, but the airport is far from international standards. Tobago is now on a journey towards developing an airport that falls within the ambit of internationally acceptable or internationally settled standards, if I may put it that way. That could only augur well for an increase in tourists and tourist dollars, in the number of tourists and the amalgam of tourist dollars that would come to the island. Is Tobago? I am of the view that Tobago is evolving in a direction in terms of the making it open to international travel on the scale that we see that airport is taking us. That Tobago is going to have a serious amount of injection of foreign investment, because one would believe that private sector interest in setting up industry in Tobago, both on the primary and the manufacturing side, would come with that airport development. So the growth factors are there. I'm talking about the physical structure is there for growth and development. As to whether there is policy in place to manage that sort of development, that is left to be seen. For islands for Tobago as an island to grow and develop, are you seeing that the direction that the THA is taking Tobago will facilitate that sort of growth and development?
Absolutely not. I am not seeing any direction. No, I know, anybody else knows where the THA is going. In 2022, when the economic collapsed, the THA didn't have the courage to tell the society. That collapse continued in 2023, and the THA is operating as though it's all hunky-dory. Trinidad is making progress recovering from COVID all the way through for the last 3 years. Tobago initiated collapse in 2021 when we removed the PNM from office. The economic collapsed in 2022, and Farley ain't tell the society nothing. That collapse continues into 2023, and Farley still ain't tell the society nothing way in 2024. If Vanus James didn't live in Tobago, Tobagonians would never know that, for example. So I don't know what direction they think we're going in, but from the evidence that I see, while you're beginning to make some progress down there in Trinidad, we're going in the opposite direction over here in Tobago, backwards. So in 2 years ago, 3 years before COVID, 2019, we used to be able to fund about 20% of the Tobago budget with the Tobago economy. In 2022, that collapsed to 18%. And in 2023, it lingers around 18, near 19%. So where is Tobago going? And let me remind you one additional point without taking over your conversation. Look, if you watch, the airport thing is not a big, you can't rely on big infrastructure to drive development without all the rest of the package. Let me remind you from the evidence in front of you. Jamaica developed, when I was there doing poverty policy design in Jamaica, Jamaica developed some of the finest airport facilities in the region. They redid the whole of Kingston's airport. They redid Mobe Airport and so on. They developed stuff down in Ochio, Cabeza, and them areas down there, and came up with other facilities that could be used. The GDP per capita of Jamaica still didn't grow by anything more than just about 1% per year. So it's now at $55,200 per person, right? Not too far from where Tobago is with no airport. So it's not enough to have fancy airport and build big infrastructure. That's true also of the Eastern Caribbean. You have to put a comprehensive package of programming, sound programming, collectively made by the society, in place to deal with the challenges. And I would do well to remind you that Farley promised the people of Tobago in December, in the elections of 2021, that we would develop a proper development plan, given the disasters that were the PNM2, PNM plan CDP1 and CDP2. That didn't take Tobago anyway. And he abandoned the project in 2022 because I indicated to him that you can't plan for Tobago in town hall meetings. He told me in his office that he wanted to adopt the techniques of Patrick Manning to do plan for Tobago. You can't do plan for any place like that. You have to put together proper structures and processes to hear from the business community properly, from all the interests, from the communities, everybody, and all of that to funnel through well-designed systems with proper rules for all the divisions and so on. This has nothing to do with town meeting at all. So because I didn't agree with that sort of nonsense, Farley walked away from the idea of doing a plan. And up to now, they put 2 budgets before the parliament, backed by no plan. No idea the growth targeting required, no idea about anything, just completely loose. Now, if in a properly run country, you can't get away with that. The Senate at least would block what you're doing and say, look, this can't work. You can't keep going on like this. But you, of course, you will need an elected Senate to control such an outfit as an executive with enormous power, with your control of your money and your control of your guns and all them things. So that goes right back to the whole conversation about proper design of the government in Tobago and the government in Trinidad. And let me remind you from the perspective of autonomy, there can be no autonomy for Tobago unless the government of Trinidad and Tobago as a whole is itself properly designed. If you want to, we could talk about that a little bit, but there can be no real autonomy for Tobago until Trinidad and Tobago is constitutionally properly designed to ensure that the people of Tobago and the THA can weigh in whenever policies are made in Trinidad that might affect Tobago. The same would be true, of course. There can be no proper governance mechanism in Tobago, in the THA, unless the communities have access to a THA that is designed in such a way that when things are being done to affect them, they have a place to go in the THA, in the Tobago governance structure, and say, this is what we think. No such thing exists. You know, exists in Trinidad, you know, exists in Tobago. So how do you build a viable economy on those conditions when you are our kinds of economies? Let me just throw a figure at you to remind you of the dangers that you're dealing with. In Trinidad, it's about 68% of your labor force that's undereducated on the basis of your standards as Trinidad and Tobago. In Trinidad, not in Tobago, in Trinidad, in Tobago is 74% undereducated people. So you're working with a real challenge when you're talking about developing the economy. You don't have enough level 4 quality and level 4 skills. And to deal with that, you can't make serious policy based on what public servants tell you. You have to make serious policy based on what public servants tell you and based on what the public brings to the table through proper fora. That's why you have to reform the government. Otherwise, we will flounder forever, just like Jamaica is doing with all the big fancy airport. They ain't going nowhere.
So is it that you're saying that you're of the view that the line of communication between the electorate and the persons making the decisions, which is central government, and in the case of Tobago, between the Tobagonians and the THA, that line of communication is faulty and flawed, and until that is addressed, then we have a problem?
Fundamental. You couldn't put it more beautifully, Farid. We were making that point since 1970. CLR James fell out with Eric Williams over that issue. When Williams put him under house arrest, that was the issue. Set up the country in such a way that no one man could dictate to everybody. All of us get to weigh in on sound policy. You put your finger on it exactly correctly.
But Because the people are isolated in such a way, and I'm saying isolated in terms of what we're discussing, the lack of line of communication, proper communication process. That is what central government and perhaps the THA on some level, you could correct me, that is what it thrives on in isolating the electorate. That is why an executive can do as it wants and engage in financial impropriety if that is what is happening. I'm not saying that is happening. That gives rise to the opportunity for financial impropriety and for bad governance and malgovernance. The forces that be may not be interested in opening up that line of communication because that serves as an oversight body, a natural oversight body to keep dictators from developing and expressing themselves and opening their wings to do as they please. And so
Well, let me just, I agree with broadly what you're saying, but let me remind you that as bad as corruption is, the worst thing you could have a government practice is incompetence. Incompetence and ignorance is far worse than corruption, just as it is far worse than poverty. So what we need to do to solve that problem of both corruption and incompetence is to set up the government so what you're calling proper lines of communication are established. And the effect of the proper lines must be that ultimately it is the people and their elected representatives that control the behavior, ring fence the behavior of the executive function. So you put a limited couple of people to do executive work, and all the rest of us go to the parliament to make law. And in the process of making law, they are obliged to act as representatives and come talk to us as a public. And that's the whole point of committees that are oversight committees that could hold hearings to hear from the public, hear from all the various interest groups on what is to be done on any particular matter. Until we set it up around that broad outline, it doesn't matter whether they're corrupt or they're incompetent, the end result will effectively be the same, with incompetence being the greater enemy of the two, although corruption is not nice. The greater guilt that I've seen is the guilt of incompetence.
the under-education you speak of in Tobago, as it exists in Trinidad, Fali may be a victim itself of that. He may not have the education required to understand the fundamental problems that what needs to be done. You are an economist and you are PhD qualified, so you're highly trained and your years of experience and your working experience speaks for itself. Why haven't you made yourself available to the Tobago electorate in terms of assuming public office and assuming a position within the DTHA itself in terms of contesting?
Well, as I pointed out to Robinson back in 1977, it is not who you put in office in, it's what system you put in place. My views, my information would be fully and adequately available. It doesn't matter whether Fali is incompetent or not, it's whether the people of Tobago are incompetent. In other words, the real issue is, can we provide mechanisms to hear from everybody that would allow us to make joint decisions? And until you set that system up, you could put God to run it. Don't forget, Eric Williams was a master historian, a genuinely skilled PhD in history out of Oxford, with a really revolutionary, accurate thesis. He still mashed up Trinidad and Tobago because of incompetence. So it's not the skill of an individual, it's the system that we design. And my point to the people of Tobago, I go around and talk about it everywhere, as I did this morning for about an hour in a forum they asked me to come and speak at. The issue is to design the system so all of us could weigh in. It's the collective wisdom, as you should know from understanding the march of humanity. Human learning is collective learning. It's not individual genius and individual brilliance. That helps, but it's nowhere near enough. So what you have to have is mechanisms in place to allow for every voice to weigh in if it chooses to weigh in. And I guarantee you that if we set up the government of Tobago properly, my views would be all over the map, all over the place. There will be no way for anything to be going on in Tobago that I wouldn't weigh in, just like I weigh in now. And I weigh in from a political standpoint. But it's not enough for you to have an activist. It's not enough for you to have a talented chief secretary. It doesn't matter if you have a dumb one, as long as you set up the system so you could hear from all of us and all our views weigh in. So where do I get truth from? When I take the CSO data that they share with me, I make truth by analyzing that data using means and variances and skewness indicators and other things like those. I extract truth from the data that's collected, assuming it's reasonably well collected. You pool information, in other words, from a wide variety of sources to arrive at sensible truth. And that design is what is required inside the government of Trinidad and the government of Tobago and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Opportunity for us to consider what everybody says when the representatives of our people are making law. So it's not, I am not making myself available. I am available to the people at Tobago for free every day. I weigh in all the time. I don't think it makes sense. And I remember I made myself available to campaign to remove the PNM. You can't say I make myself available for that. And then after we removed the PNM, I was available to tell them, here's how we have to set up the government. So you could bring all of us into the conversation. So my availability is never in question. The fact that I don't run for office just tells you I'm not interested in joining the line of executives who are guaranteed to fail under the system. My fight is to change the system. That was my fight under Robinson, and it's my fight today. Robinson didn't understand the change required. He told us you can't eat constitution. Look the trouble we're in today. And it's the same from my cousin Winston. Same with Hochoy. He came to understand a little bit of it later. A little bit of it. But the Hochoy law is the THA Act. It's Hochoy and Ramesh designed that law. All the mess of incompetence is written into that law. So, until we come to grips as a people with the need to do things collectively, I have to hear what you think. It's not what Vannas James think alone, it's what all of us think. That's what will get us on the right road to progress. So, I am not away from the people. You're just asking me to run for office is to join the chorus of a march to authoritarian rule. And the worst thing you could do for a country is to put people like me in power with authoritarian tools in my hand. And then you find yourself, you can't even run the public service. People can't report. People can't function. The better good for the people at Tobago from me is to fight for the change in the system so all of us could participate. And that's my fight. That's always been my fight. That was my fight in 1972 when I marched the street as a young teacher, and it's the same fight today.
Is it that you're saying, or that you? This is just my view from looking from the bleachers. Is it that whoever is placed in that office at the THA, they would find themselves a slave to the provisions of the Act, so much so that they find themselves hamstrung to introduce initiative and change?
Well, actually, you could see when he became Prime Minister in 2015, he said he don't want to change the rules. You get yourself in power. And there's a psychology that goes with that. The psychology of the ruler, the psychology of the colonial governor, and of the slave master. You are in power, you have to act. The whole configuration is not we are in power, we have to make joint decisions. And even if that was the thinking you have, the system is not set up that way. So you have to be clever in order to redesign, as I recommended to Farley. Let's redesign the government under the arrangements the law would allow. So the whole point is that the real fight, and the fight that the people would trust, is the fight to change the system, not a promise to take power and then change the system. What the population would trust, like everywhere else in the Caribbean, and what they trusted in 1972, was as a set of people who were not saying, put me in power. They were saying, empower all the people. And that was what worked to deal with racism and colorism and so on in Trinidad and Tobago, and to condemn that to the dustbin of history. We are in a culture sphere in which authoritarianism reigns supreme. And what people will trust is not you demanding your chance to be the authoritarian ruler and the king, but advising them. What people would trust is your advice to set up the government so all of us could have a say. That's what I am gambling on. I could run for office and win, but I know from watching the whole Caribbean experience, both as a historian and as a student of economics and as a person living for 70 plus years in Trinidad and Tobago, that nothing is achieved when you put the idea before the people that because you have a PhD, you're going to do good. Williams proved that to be wrong. Robbie was a lawyer, economist out of Oxford, still mash up Tobago, still a mess. Ochoa didn't have any of them fancy degrees, still destroyed. So it doesn't matter your degree for that purpose. What matters is your case to the people, a credible case, that we should reorganize the government so every voice from every community and every community across the country could be properly heard and be empowered. That's the case.
Let's talk about some of the issues that are making the newsprint that's within the editorial on a day-to-day basis. Crime. We are Twin Island state, and it's so easy for a Trinidadian and for persons who don't wish to follow the true line of the law to just take a boat and come to Tobago, fly to Tobago. I'm not saying that the criminality that is now flourishing in Tobago has Trini origins, but I'm saying that we have a crime problem in Trinidad that is out of control. And Tobago was always viewed between the two islands as a safe place and a nice haven where you can go and relax. You don't have to think about the pressures of survival in Tobago in the way that we think in Trinidad. To put it another way, I'm not coming out my front door and taking a walk in Trinidad randomly, just like that. I may feel that feeling and get that feeling when I'm in Tobago because it's less pressure. But when we look at the narrative that is Tobago now, there is a level of criminality that is creeping into the society. My last count, it's 5 murders for the year already. Last year it was, I believe it was close to 15. Before that, it was closer to 10. That trend is a rising trend, and we're just talking murders. We can't interpret criminality purely in terms of murder. In terms of violent crimes, it's on the rise. Gang warfare in Trinidad is out of control. We hear about Rasta City. We hear about 6 and 7 gangs. The data out there is that there are 122 gangs in Trinidad alone. In Tobago, it's 20 plus. That narrative doesn't augur well for how we are interpreted in the eyes of the international communities. When we look at the laws, our Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, is saying that when we talk crime talks, the opposition has not tabled a team to carry that discussion forward. The opposition is saying unless Mr. Rowley is part of the team, they're not prepared to meet. And they're not prepared to meet given the agenda and how the central government wants to constitute that discussion. Simply put, central government wants to speak about addressing certain key pieces of legislation that they think they need support from the opposition to pass into law, meaning the anti-gang legislation could not have been renewed or updated in a way that central government thinks is necessary in order to deal with the issue of crime. So that was the Anti-Gang Act simply in its current incarnation can't address some of the issues that we have as it speaks to treating with gangs. The Bail Amendment Act, there was a time in my own experience where if one is brought before the court for having committed or alleged to have committed a scheduled offense, and which is a serious crime, that being crimes involving shooting with intent, crimes involving robbery. If it is you are brought before the court to answer to such a charge and you have a crime of a similar nature pending before the court, you automatically denied bail for 4 months. That has since been changed, meaning that that provision hasn't been supported by the current opposition. So therefore, the provision doesn't exist anymore. If And this is my question to you, are you seeing that the inability of the UNC and the PNM to meet and on common ground in Parliament and have passed into existence laws that require a special majority as a hindrance to addressing the crime situation in Trinidad and in your situation, particularly Tobago?
Well, I mean, let me be, given my knowledge of your professional capabilities, let me begin my answer by saying you ought to know, and I think the country ought to learn from you that all of these things, anti-gang legislation and what have you, are putting dirty plasters over festering sores. You can't deal with crime in Trinidad or crime prevention in Tobago. You can't do crime reduction in Trinidad or crime prevention in Trinidad and Tobago under the existing dispensation, the way the country works. And you want evidence of that, go look in Jamaica. When I was the poverty reduction expert of Jamaica, one of the things I observed for the head of the Planning Institute of Jamaica at that time, Dr. Wesley Hughes, is that crime, as I understand it, from watching in the US and other places, Mexico and so on, is really part of economic activity. People, for whatever reasons, find themselves in a position where that's the way they think they ought to try to make a living. It's scamming taking over Jamaica today and all of that sort of stuff. And you don't deal with that by anti-gang mechanisms. You have to go to the root of that problem. And I told that, I remember in a meeting in the office of the Minister of National Security in Jamaica. At that time, it was Dr. Peter Phillips. I remember saying to him, until we take the time to study crime the same way we study poverty, full-fledged, not from a policing standpoint and putting up a police there and putting the army and the police over here in some Zozo and stuff like that, not from that perspective. An understanding of the root issues from the household level come right up, the communities and so on. Until you understand crime that way, you can't know what to do. But the summary result of all of the work that I have done and seen on crime is that if the communities are not empowered to deal with these root problems from the ground, if the people of Laventille are not empowered to look after development in Laventille, so that when a home is in trouble with a 5-year-old, you could get access to the quality of social work via the community's knowledge and the community's desire to intervene to prevent that child from going bad. If we don't tackle it at that level, where the communities are empowered to deal with undereducation, orientation to criminality, troubled homes, inadequate parenting, where you need surrogate parenting to help parents to cope with challenges, drugs, this, that, the other, and so on. The world doesn't end. You can't deal with crime cold turkey. It's a long historical process. So you need to put something in place that could learn and grow and adapt to deal with the challenges, and you'll deal with it over a long period of time. But it all starts with community empowerment, financially and constitutionally, in terms of the right to organize itself and to take steps appropriate to the community, acting as a community. And until you deal with that, you can't prevent crime from eking out, whether it's coming from Trinidad or not. You can't prevent it in Tobago. I know a lot of the guys in the communities up and down Tobago, and they all complain that what are we to do? That sort of stuff. Well, who are these guys? Who are the look, you have a whole lot of people who have no better way. I'm not going out there to commit crime because I have a particular way to make a living that doesn't require me to deal in criminality. But what would I do if none of those things would work, for example? That would be the fundamental question. So, you have to set up the country to deal with crime and the solution of crime properly. And you have to study the problem properly. And only when those two things are being done simultaneously, you're going to have any shot at grappling with crime reduction in Trinidad or crime prevention in Tobago. So this is not about whether they have anti-gang legislation and whether Kamala support what Rowley's saying and whether Kamala and Rowley meet or not. The best thing for Kamala and Rowley to do is to sit down and agree that we're going to have a proper agenda of constitutional reform for the first time. And one of the fundamental flaws in how Rowley approached this whole constitutional reform thing is that he put your own committee together. He ain't call Kamala and ask Kamala nothing. Kamala learned about this committee in the papers just like me and you. So when you're governing as an authoritarian, almost none of the fundamental problems in the country could be tackled in any proper way because you can't get any chance to get to the root of the problem. Maybe if Rowley could sit down with Kamala in a proper conversation, Kamala might remind him of the possibilities that proper constitutional reform would offer for crime reduction and crime prevention. Maybe, I don't know. But it's ultimately not a conversation between the two of them alone, it's all of us. So when I turn up with my information for the committee, I will turn up with all my information about how crime prevention ties to constitutional reform through community empowerment and so on, to grapple with the fundamental causes of troubled homes, troubled irrelevant education system, and so on, police incompetence in the sense of the absence of proper institutions to educate police. I mean, you from your profession, the vast majority of the police officers in the country are undereducated themselves. When I was a professor in City University, the people who I taught in John Jay College of Criminal Justice were police officers from New York City on the beat, coming to class from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the night, doing bachelor's and master's degree in criminal justice. You give a man 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 months of training in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and put him on the road and call him police. You don't do economics that way, you don't do law that way. So, the country needs to wake up and sit down and think through what we're doing. What we're doing is allowing authoritarianism to block thought about how we proceed and how we solve problems. And I can guarantee you, we will never solve the problem of crime in Trinidad in the way Jamaica has never been able to solve theirs, just by plastering over sores with dirty plasters. They did more about anti-gang stuff, sending the army to take over communities for months on end. As soon as the army leave, the crime go down. As soon as the army come in, as soon as the army leave, the crime come back. You have to deal with these at the fundamental level of the empowerment of the communities to look after itself properly.
Is it that you're saying that community building is the first step in change?
Absolutely. All the change. Individual empowerment and community empowerment. The first step. All community empowerment includes what we normally will think of as community development. It's the power of the community to take decisions for its own development, the development of its members. If you don't begin there, Fareed, and carry along with that the empowerment of the individual, so that the community is organized in such a way that any individual in the community that wants to attend hearings by the community on any issue can feel free to show up. And any individual from a community that wants to show up in a parliamentary hearing has access to that hearing. This joke that we have called in Joint Select Committee now is not a serious thing. We're not serious as a country. We need to wake up and deal with these things. I mean, we spent an entire lifetime studying this problem. From I was a little boy, we've been studying this problem to now. So we know the answers, but you can't get the answer if you lock down the parliament and nobody can talk to them about nothing serious. and you lock down the THA and nobody can talk to them about nothing serious. You can't get access to the answers in a suitable way. So that's why I'm agreeing with Rowley to call the Constitutional Reform Commission. I thought he did it the wrong way because you need to go into it with a partnership with the opposition leader. But still, if you're doing it, let all of us opposition and all take over the process and make sure Rowley can't turn it into any pappy show.
My concern, and I hear you, I'm with you. You're saying that constitutional reform and empowerment of communities and building societies is going to change it's going to impact on crime levels to bring it to where it should be, if
Correct.
not eliminating altogether.
Correct. And it will take time. It's not that when you reform the Constitution later this year, crime will just disappear, because you have to empower the communities and put them to work. So it may take 5 years, 10 years, there will be remedial things to be done. I mean, you have a whole, as I said, 68% of your labor force up and down in the communities of Trinidad don't have any serious education according to the standards of the country. The communities are going to have to grapple with that. They're going to have to say, look, we have too many undereducated people in here. We're going to put together a proper program in this community and so on. The kinds of things that they will know, and all the other economic things that they'll have to do. You think if Laventille had real community power, Despas would be down at the foot of the hill, desperate for home? They would have empowered Despas properly from up the hill long time with a real theater, all the things you'd be talking about with Pan and so on. They would have turned Despas into a major music school. The whole country want to go to school there, and in order to do that, they would protect the environment, and they would have solved the problem of Laventille underdevelopment. Laventille is one of the most beautiful spots in the country. They would have dealt with the power of that spot in terms of high quality housing, people rushing to go and live in the community and so on and so on. Laventille would have transformed Laventille if it had proper power to do so. But if you have to sit down and wait on some minister from somewhere in Neverary to come and notice Laventille's problems, you're dead in the water from the start. It all has to start with community and individual empowerment. And Jack was right in 1970, power to the people. They're still right today.
Would you agree that to achieve what you're suggesting, you need people who genuinely have the best interests of the country at heart? The politicians and who are in government and also in opposition, the two elements, they are persons who've, some of their leadership, and I'm not just pointing out to the two leaders, Kamala Prasad and Keith Rowley, the persons who sit in cabinet, when you look at how long they've made a career of being a politician and a career of doing things a certain way, they benefit from the institutions of the state as it exists. They subsist they subsist in the current dispensation, in the way things are. When you have 300,000 persons voting PNM and 300,000 persons voting UNC, and you have an electorate that is that must pander to these two elements to find self-reliance and self-expression. Those two bodies find themselves in a position of control. What you're asking in terms of the reform that is required, do you agree with me that it means that they will have to sacrifice self for country?
Well, it is always true that we all have to care about our country. The type of, ultimately, development is a people problem. So it's all about the type of people we all are collectively speaking about it as a collective thing, meaning where the majority weighs. But the vast majority, I mean, I can't tell you I know anybody in the country who has ill intent towards the country. I don't know them. Maybe they exist, but I don't know any of those people. And I spend my time walking up and down and talking to people all over the country. I think the fundamental problem that I saw is limited understanding. So, for example, having gone to school and studied this problem with the background I got in UWI and in Tapia with Lloyd Best, I could now say that while Lloyd understood a whole lot of things about this constitution reform stuff, the arithmetic of the structure of the government and the arithmetic of the structure of the Senate, he didn't have, right? Now, those are things you dig up by careful research over 30 years. So a lot of that arithmetic I can now bring to the conversation so we can understand how to design the government so that the intent that Tapia had in mind could be achieved, or the intent that NJAC had in mind. But what you could see is there's a lot of ignorance that's been at play. And it takes time, as you know, for people to learn collectively and grow. You have cell phone in your pocket now, but just a couple of years ago, you had landline in your house and you didn't do anything to get a cell phone. It takes scholars all over the world to go discover how electronics must work, the movement of light and what have you, and radio waves and all of that sort of stuff before you could deal with this problem in a serious way. When I was doing my graduate studies in mathematics, I remember when programmers in New York University Current Center would call the design of a cell phone a brick. Nobody wanted a brick. Look at what you have in your hand today. So my point is, learning is collective. And what we have to learn, we didn't know, say, in 2010 when Kamala took it on to tackle the problem of constitutional reform. And Prakash and his team and my partner Hamid and so on took them down the road of a whole proportional representation mechanism for picking the parliament without dealing with the fundamental structural design that would allow for the control of executive power and the actions on the behalf of the people by their representatives controlling the process of making law. All that was out of the picture, and the whole discussion went down the wrong road. So now we have learned from all of that, and if we have a proper conversation, we could get back on track. In that whole conversation about what is to be done, I agree with you, people have to be well-meaning. But I doubt that well-meaning people with ignorance in their pockets could get you anywhere. It takes good intention plus knowledge and skill, and that means collective decision-making when all is said and done. Because no one man, it's not like winning a Nobel Prize where one man discovers the answer. You need that too. But that's not enough when you're talking about good governance and development as a process. Development is a people process. All of us.
Dr. Winford James, Farid, excuse me for a moment. Tell me something. Based on your knowledge of the operations of these systematic changes, can we find the right people, or do you know of a bunch of people who carry the same intentions and attitude towards these kind of changes, outside of those who can be influenced via party relations and people who are really independent? Are there a pool of people who can join with you to impact changes like that?
Well, the history of the country is that the answer to that is yes. When it was CLR and a whole set of his cronies who anchored the story of party politics in the West Indies, and every cook could govern. It wasn't CLR alone. It was a whole. I ultimately remember he tried to even form the Workers' and Farmers Party and so on. It was just one man. The country has never had to deal with one man understanding anything. If you come to 1970, it was not Daga alone. It was a whole generation of young people who saw the light and decided we're going to fight the country and not go on the way we're going. And if you look in the efforts to form NAR, you had great contributions from Lloyd and Baz and to a limited extent Robbie and so on. You had Alan Harris and a whole range of other people who were contributing for J.D. Elder. Whenever we made progress in the country, it was never based on one man. And whenever we try to do it with one man, we end up with dictatorship, as in the case of Eric Williams, and we go nowhere. So the people, if you open the door and allow for those who want to contribute to come forward, and you encourage people not to be scared. Remember here you have a whole set of people who are discouraged from bringing forward their thoughts by fear of transgression of some unwritten rules by their bosses and so on. So a huge pool of knowledge might exist in the public service, for example, and they can't talk because of civil service rules. So when you liberate people by saying, "Come, let we talk," whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever your function, come, let we talk. Those who are clear and thoughtful will come. Those who are ignorant will come. And we'll hear everybody and we'll see how. And I am confident that when a proper process is put in place, then in a kind of way, wisdom and human collective learning tends to trump the tendency to stasis and doubt and uh, fake news and stuff like that. All of that could be trumped by opening the door and creating a proper process for the thing to be worked out. It's the absence of arrangements to allow joint decision making that keeps us making mistake after mistake after mistake and not going forward. So you and I don't have to go out and find 10 people to work with me. That's the Abraham solution, but that's not what is required when you're talking good governance. When you're talking good governance, you just set up the system, open the door, and whoever wants to come, a coalition of the willing, they'll come. But there are people. I can tell you, I talk to people all the time. There are lots of people.
Is it that you're saying once the institutions of the state and the correct infrastructure is put in place, then the personnel will be guided by the institutional framework, and therefore the change and the community that we're seeking has a fighting chance to present itself on us in terms of we must first get the infrastructure correct.
Yeah, I agree. My son is a lawyer, along the lines of your capabilities, and he would say to me, one of the things that you have to not forget to remind the people of is that if you don't set up opportunities for them to practice democracy, then they will never learn as human beings how to function in a democratic way, and all the truth you are talking about will never come to the fore. So I agree with that. You have to set up the system. That was the luck of the Americans. Jefferson had learned from watching Marie Antoinette and Louis XIV lose their neck, and Robespierre. He was the ambassador to France when all these momentous events, liberty, equality, fraternity, were playing out. Ben Franklin was a scholar out of London at the time. You had Alexander Hamilton, was an Evasion coming out of slavery, was a fantastic scholar and went to the US, and so on. Mason, all of these people the society had a collective of high quality scholarship, but they also had an opportunity and circumstances that forced them to sit down and listen to one another. And it is out of that continuing conversation, it took them years to work out the answer that translated into the American Constitution. But ultimately, they got it right. How do you get a strong executive without getting a king? There are two answers to that. They framed it one way. The British came to another part of the answer with the what we call Westminster. But they only got there by cutting off Charles I's neck. Under Cromwell and them fellas, and they come forward with the thing. Now, we don't have to cut off anybody neck in Trinidad and Tobago, but we've got to seize the opportunity to talk to each other with patience, and don't think that people who come to the conversation must come with all the answers, each man being quote-unquote bright in the way the country tends to talk about bright people. It's everybody's views that make collective knowledge. All of them have to be in the pool, and you have to encourage people to come and say their piece, whether they're making sense or not. And you have a core group of people listening, collecting the notes, gathering the information, framing the propositions and so on. Field it, and you're not rushing. You take your time and do it properly. Rowley say he has 6 months. Okay, but that is him. The country has to go on until we get this right. And if we get it right, once and for all, then we could set proper foundations so 100, 200 years from now, we don't have to look back in the way I have to look back over the history of Tobago's efforts and say everything these people did were wrong. You could now, after 200-300 years, say we are happy that in 2024, Trinidad and Tobago did it in the right way. And if we do it in the right way, we will influence the whole Caribbean. We're struggling with, I am part of the conversations in Jamaica. We're struggling with the same questions in Jamaica. Same challenges with governments that are reluctant to allow for the empowerment of their people. But if we understood it well in Trinidad and Tobago, we could share what we know with the whole region and wake up the Caribbean finally after 400 years of damage by slavery and the legacies of slavery and strict indenture. There is no reason for us to keep going now in 2024 the old-fashioned way and worry whether there are good people in the country and there ain't good people in the country and so on. Open the door and let all of we come to the conversation. And that's my point to Farley and them. Although we set up the conversation here and demonstrate to Trinidad how it must be done. Let people be free.
What about the love for authoritative positions? You know, like being a king, you might enjoy the benefits and what is offered for having a kingdom, and you'll have people who will be within your control as king puppet or king puppeteer, and you pulling the strings. How do the people who, let's say, the majority of people demand that we needed the enforcement of these changes, and the king is there? How do we break down those walls, Dr. James?
Collective action. You can't. We didn't have any willing king in 1970. Look at the fundamental changes that the 1970 revolution, the February Revolution, caused in the country. Once the people are liberated to come and bring their views and so on, you don't know where all sorts of great ideas will come from. You just have to free up your people. Just the same way you get fantastic science to give you cell phones and carry you to the moon and so on. It's the same process. You have to liberate people to think. What we do in Trinidad and Tobago and all the rest of these Caribbean societies is we suppress thought with authoritarian rule. And the only answer to those who want to be kings, just like the answers to bullies, is wisdom and thoughtfulness and dialogue. And so, you could beat up a bully if you're strong enough, but ultimately you win with reason. You say, man, look, this is not the way to go. I mean, when all is said and done, either both are we die or both are we reason and learn how to live together. That's the way you have to go. You have to allow for collective reason and collective dialogue. That's the only way. So you don't have to worry about whether kings are there in the conversation or let them come. But the way you set up the rules is the king must come with his opinion, and that's just one.
Understood.
Why can't we set rules that way? We're not stuck with rules that say the king alone must decide, are we?
The reason and the logic that you're bringing to the table, if that is applied to Trinbago and the CDC, the Carnival Development Corporation, if that is applied to all the elements of society and all the industries that impact on people, if the changes are put in place, institutions are set up in a proper way, then is it that you're saying that it eliminates the need for conflict and it creates greater efficiency?
Well, it creates the need for skilled conflict management. I mean, there are many types of people who will come. There are action people, there are process people, there are dictators, as David is saying, and so on. There are all kinds of people will come. But if the process is set up properly, and in particular, if it's set up through the principles of representative government, so that the executive doesn't make the rules, it's the representatives who go to work every day to make law. If you set up the country that way, if you set up Trinbago that way, or any other institution that way, the effect of it is that the institutional arrangement will allow for all sorts of voices to weigh in, and the nature of human logic and human reason will be such that it will tend to override the inclination to dictatorial. So you'll ponder dictatorial decision making. So you'll ponder on the options and try to choose the best course of action. And that's the process of lawmaking that operates in Westminster, or even to some extent in the American system, or in Finland and Sweden and so on. That's what you have to put in place. Processes of joint decision making, so that all the views can be processed by people who go there for that purpose. Think about it this way, Fareed. If you change the parliament in Trinidad and Tobago and say, okay, you have 15 members in the cabinet, that's it, no more. We're going to put 80 other members in this parliament, and their job is only to make law. They have no business in the cabinet at all. They make the law, they will vote the cabinet, they will set up their committees on all the various things, and all the committees will do the work to gather information to the parliament. You still will have majority rule, but the majority on the winning side will be so much outnumbering the cabinet that the cabinet becomes the less important of the story, and the more important is the majority. That's what you see going on in real Westminster rule in Britain. You know, as I pointed out, I think to you before, the British didn't get to move Boris Johnson because the Labour Party wanted to move Boris Johnson. It was the Conservative Party that removed him. And it was the Conservative Party that removed Liz Truss. The lesson from that is that the design allows, and we don't have to go presidential to get this done. We could do it by reforming the current government that we have. The lesson from it is that you have to design the parliament in such a way that there are people going to parliament every day just to make law, not to be in the cabinet, not to long to kick out the cabinet, not any of that. Just to make law, their job, and their important jobs, all of them, opposition and government, in the process of making law. And when you set up that, they can't make law unless they set up a proper conversation with the country. That's what the hearings are about. And when you have those two things combined, what you're going to have is an executive that is no longer a king. They now have to listen to what everybody else have to say. And just in case they disagree, it have a whole independent bunch of representatives who will make law to ring fence what they do. That is what kills the kingdom and kills authoritarianism and sets the country on a path to dialogue, continuous discussion, reflection, and control of executive power by sound lawmaking processes. That's what isn't taught in the jurisprudence of the law school. But Fareed, you heard it here first.
Dr. James, tell me something. Is it a prerogative then that we start electing people to senatorial positions?
Absolutely. Absolutely mandatory. Fundamental point there, David. Listen, the central issue is this. If you look in Trinidad and Tobago, you would see it all over Trinidad. Pinal no say, and they're lagging behind. So they've become vulnerable to all sorts of criminal enterprises. Siparia no say, they're lagging behind. Mayaro, they're lagging behind. Toko and so on. But there are many, Chatham, all beach, all over Trinidad. You have huge numbers of communities that are neglected, oppressed, and abused by a system of government in which there is nobody that takes responsibility to ensure spatial equity of development opportunity. That's what an elected Senate does, and an appointed Senate cannot do that job. And what an elected Senate would be able to do is, suppose you elect, say, 30, 31 of them, you elect them. And the assignment, the primary assignment, is to consider spatial equity, equality of access to opportunity for development, and to manage and take ultimate responsibility for the development budget of the country. In other words, no development budget can be passed in Trinidad and Tobago unless the Senate signs off on it. And then when you empower the senators, so that you need a huge majority of them, in the US Senate is somewhere near 90%. You have to have almost consensus for them to execute their mandate. And when they when they look at your development budget, as you see it in New York City Charter, for example, when they look at your development budget and they say, well, there is not enough, Minister of Finance, there is not enough here for Toko. Go think about it and come back. The minister said no. They said, well, you can't get no development budget this year. So the Senate, right, with its full power to do all the other things that it has to do, treat with appointments and all these sorts of things, removing the prime minister from a lot of these possibilities of abuse of power and all that. But the central function of a Senate has to be to ensure spatial equity in access to development opportunity. And they hold advise and consent over the development budget for that purpose. And when you do that, the senators are empowered, they're held responsible, they take their job seriously, they provide a place where the communities can go and say, I hear you're talking about spatial equity, well, this is what we think. This is what we want you to think about. And when you set up all of those combined processes, joint decision-making plus senatorial responsibility for equity of development opportunity and so on, oversight of the development budget and all that. When you do that, what you do is you empower the country at all levels to take on development challenges properly. And that's what will open up the door for the country to diversify the economy. If you don't do it that way, you get the hit and miss that we're going with. We're going to miss 2030 and so on. You get that hit and miss because the fundamental structures of sound decision making and sound development budget management are not in place. So you are quite right that you'll need an elected Senate that can say, Chatham people say, Mayaro people say. The senators you have now who are appointed can't talk that way. They don't have access to the power of representation. But if you elect them, they have to guide the country from the perspectives of their constituencies, and they have to guide their constituencies from the perspectives of the country. And that's the power of an elected Senate. So that's the way to go.
How do we do that, Dr. James? How do we bring up? Because I know that is where the real control of the Iraqi lie, and it's difficult to remove that old system when the king and his kingdom would not allow that.
You have to do what I do. You have to. You see what I did. If I turned against Fali and them, they could win the 2021 elections. It was my campaign that was at the very heart. All over Tobago, people heard what we want to do to empower them, and that is the way you have to. All of us have to become party to the ownership of the country and lay out what we understand the country should be doing. And if enough of us have the right answers from a scientific standpoint in the way that I'm talking about it, if enough of us talk to the country about its empowerment the way we did in 1970 without proper answers, but just the enthusiasm, we moved the country in 51 days. If that was Dagan and his team, Kamban and them, in 51 days, all of us were young students marching the street. I was a young teacher in Tobago at the time and so on. I could tell you, it doesn't take long to allow good sense to prevail. In this Caribbean space that I am observing, the people instinctively know what makes sense for them from their experience. They know that it must be inclusive if the governmental structures are to work for them. And so when you push that, any dictator show up in there, people will call him out. That's the way you do it. You have to get involved. You have to turn your station into a serious education center where all the high science is given full reign. You have to engage this story of constitutional reform in a serious way over a series of conversations throughout the whole period. So nobody could say, Power 102 ain't talking about it. And all the stations need to team up and join the fray to say, time come. We're going to now seize the opportunity. And that will put all the dictators on the back foot and we'll make real progress. I think that's the way we have to go. That's why I am up and down in Tobago talking about it every day. I am holding series on TV about it. Every month I try to do at least one series dealing with different aspects of the issue. And we're going to start a new one in March here and April and so on, while at the same time going into the communities and asking people if they want this and if they want that and if they want the other. And every community in Tobago is saying to me, Doc, you could come let we do one up here. You could come let we do one up here. Today, 3 different communities call me and ask me. Leaders from 3 different communities call me and ask me if I'm willing to come let we do one. We're going to do one in Mason Hall next week, Wednesday night. And of course, when they come, we ain't giving rum and roti, but we'll give cowheel soup.
Dr. James, thank you so much for making yourself available. Surely you would agree with me that Tobago has always had, it's very rich in culture, and you've always produced the very best citizens. Duvon Stewart has won 4 of the last 6 Panorama large band titles. We see the young O.J. Richards and Kirsch Ramsey following in his footsteps. The Signal Hill Choir has been around for decades. So there's a lot.
Simon was a Tobagonian, you know.
and so too was Dr.
Simon was a Tobagonian who went to Laventille to live. with the rhythms of Tambu Bamboo in his head. But it's not true. I mean, Jit wasn't a Tobagonian. The country has genius everywhere. It's just locked up.
Yes. Now, Dr. Jim.
Look at my partner, Pata Samungal on the sitar. I listen to sitar players on YouTube and so on. They can't match Mungal. We have genius everywhere in the country. And where did we get soca from? It was the partnership between Rashoti and where name from South down there.
Maestro.
No. The Indian musician. They used to meet in a bar down there in South. Black Stallion told me about it. No, Sundar was one to know, man. I can't remember him again.
But what I'm trying to ask you, Dr. Job was one of my favorites. I think by working with him for at least 12 years, it seemed like I went to a university. How do people in Trinidad, like me, for instance, get to hear these series that you conducted in Tobago as an inspiration and motivation by extension?
They're always available on Facebook and YouTube. But if you want them, we can share them with you. We can share you some of the old ones that passed, and we did a full one on the labor market for the country, Tobago, Trinidad comparisons and so on. We did a full one on the pathway to autonomic constitution reform and all that. And we're going to do one on the community empowerment this month. And we share everything with you if you want. You know, we don't keep no secret in Tobago.
Good. I'm more into tourism, so I really like to but I have a number and thing, you know. So one of these good days, don't be surprised if I call you and could get some of your time to help me.
No problem.
It's always fantastic you have you on the show. You have me like I'm in school. And I like
me and Farid.
Yeah. I love that. It's been fantastic, and it's always fantastic. I hope you can come on as regular as possible.
Yeah, man. All right. You take care. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk to you and Farid.
Yes.
Farid is a very clever guy.
Thanks so much.
Ask his questions like if he's in the courts, you know.
Yeah.
It's always good to have you. We could end on a note by saying there's a quote Thomas Hobbes that said that life outside of society would be solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. So hopefully, societally we can implement the changes that are necessary to ensure that we all have a better life in Trinidad and Tobago.
Correct. Farid, you promised to let me talk PAN and the transformation of PAN into industry one of these days. Don't forget that promise.
We will do that. I promise you that. Thank you so much.
Very
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay,
Blessings, everyone. David, enjoy the evening. Dr. James, enjoy the evening.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk with Farid Ali and his special guest, Dr. Vanus James, right here on Power 102 Digital. Come next week, we'll have another exciting, informative, and educational Hard Talk with Farid Ali again.
The future of talk is here. Power 102 Digital.